here's my bravery test on YouTube. I was not originally going to share this as a video, but what the heck. Maybe it'll be of consolation to anybody who's ever had a project fail after spending many hours on it. Here is the aforementioned 1956 Olympic that became the organ donor for the 56 Philco. The picture tube currently in the Philco came out of this one. I found these two televisions at about the same time. I've already told the story on the Philco. This one right here was stored in an abandoned outdoor storage room, which some people were cleaning out, and they called me knowing my interest in old tube type electronics and asked if I would like to have it. So I went and I took a look at it, and it was love at first sight, and I even paid them $20 for it because the cabinet actually is in pretty excellent condition compared to a lot of the things I come across. It really, from every angle, does not look that bad at all. And it hasn't even had any cleaning done on it yet. But the cabinet has survived pretty well. Right down to the door that houses the user adjustments on it. Very, very rare to find these, at least in my experience, still functional and totally intact and clean and good looking. I mean, that's really, it's really unusual for me to find them like this, y'all. And it also has the original swivel pedestal that it was originally sold with. Pretty rare indeed is to find a pedestal model still with its original pedestal. And this television had just been tucked away, uncovered in this condition in a storage room where it had sat for 30 plus years, and not really, I mean, it had stuff on top of it, but not really scratched up too bad. Not really scratched up, in fact, at all. It did have a piece of cardboard on top of it, protecting it from all the other bric-a-brac in there. Still has its original knobs, including one or two of the knobs for the, what I guess would be the brightness, contrast, vertical and horizontal hold controls in here. Actually, I think contrast control was right here on the volume control shaft. Concentric. So it was a really nice looking project. Using the Olympic AC series chassis, which was pretty popular, I guess, because in my life, this is the third Olympic I've seen using one of these chassis. And the other two I did for other people went absolutely swimmingly. So I had really a lot of confidence and high hopes on having this one for myself. But it was in internally just ruined condition. But I wasn't deterred, so I ordered a bunch of new capacitors for it, and I set about to try and get this thing working. I wish I could demonstrate the swivel on it, but that does not work with the weight of the television sitting on it. Probably the ball race is missing out of the Lazy Susan down there, but just trust me, it has one. But after 6 months of trying and failing on this thing, it ultimately, since it had a good strong replacement picture tube in it, became the picture tube donor for the 56 Philco. Now, I'm the kind of guy that never says die, but on this one I finally had to call it. It just took more and more until finally I could give no more. I could give no more, and it kept requiring more. Okay, I got it turned around here. And I discovered that the swivel does actually work if you really pick up on it while trying to move the whole thing around. So that's something that can be fixed. But here we have an internal view of it, minus the picture tube, which is currently right here. And we get kind of an overview of its condition. Looking at the back of it, we can clearly see signs, if I can pull focus here, of one of the main problems this television had. All of these spots and blemishes in the back are the remains of nasty roach poop. You hear about televisions being roached. This one actually was. It was crawling with them. That whole entire storage room it was in was crawling with them. Oh, let's see, you've got parts here. Parts there. Centering assembly off the yoke, which was destroyed. Well, the yoke cover was. More and more parts. Some of my reams and reams of notes that I made years ago while working on this. And there we have it. We've got a speaker, original speaker in it that really just, it looks like it's still got 1/10 of the cone left in it. Not from rats, y'all, but from roaches. The speaker survives in concept only. Kind of interesting that Olympic almost seems to have made provision for an extension speaker with this chassis, since it plugs in very conveniently right there at the rear of the chassis, which is fully exposed when the back is on. I really had high hopes for this one. And having succeeded with 2 others for other people, I had no small degree of confidence in this. But as luck would have it, mine I wanted for myself didn't work out. That's the way it goes. But another point that can be made is the chassis in this Olympic is, you'll notice, a unit chassis, unitized chassis, which is actually my second favorite go-to chassis design that I like to see in these old antique televisions. But they're not convenient to work on, and back when I was working on this one, it still had the picture tube mounted on it, y'all. And compared to the Philco, which chassis removal is so light and easy on, removing chassis from a television like this with a unit chassis design, picture tube and all, that's kind of a tedious operation because you have to be very careful in manipulating unit chassis, or due to chassis flex, since they all have some flex to them, no matter how ruggedly they're built, you can snap the neck from the picture tube, or you kind of risk an implosion where the bell of the picture tube rests against the yoke frame. But these are my second favorite chassis design to work on. And we'll notice also that it's a deep apron chassis. Not the deepest you'll ever see, but lighting this sucker underneath years ago when I was working on it was pretty difficult because it had to be up on its side due to the picture tube being mounted through all of my operations on it. And visibility is kind of tough when you have a deep chassis apron compared to Philco, who, as time went on, more and more just loved the shallow apron design. And that's why, as I said in a previous video about this Philco, that's why this chassis design became my favorite over the years. This design right here is almost a unit chassis. Everything except the picture tube and yoke gear and all, and the speaker comes out of one of these. Very quick and easy. Whereas with these, again, you got to be careful. These suckers right here can be tricky. If this one right here looks rough right now, you should have seen it back years ago before I ever had any YouTube ambitions, when I first recovered it. It was terrible. All along the inside of the cabinet, we see the remains of roach activity in this one. I mean, it was crawling with them. It was more than a week. Look, they totally ate away the tube chart and all of the internal cabinet information. I mean, look at that. I mean, it was crawling with them. It was filthy. And it stunk to high heaven. We've actually got pretty much all of the original internal factory antenna and this one still intact. Pretty rare to find that intact, but look all up here. Filthy, filthy, ew, ew, ew. It took no small amount of raid, and I even disassembled it and death bombed it for roaches before I ever brought this thing into the house. I mean, just look at that. I might ought to be ashamed that I haven't cleaned it up more, but I always try to get the innards of one working first. So this one's condition never really got improved any. It was rat pissed, roach pooped. Doggone, I've just now seen that. Somebody actually drew a heart inside the cabinet of this thing. Wow. Actually, I think that's supposed to be a bee. But it looks like a heart symbol, doesn't it? But yeah, the chassis in this sucker, the whole thing was rough, but very much intact. And I had really just enormously high hopes for this. I mean, I could just imagine myself watching old episodes of Twilight Zone and the Maltese Falcon on this thing, on its swivel pedestal in the corner of my living room. The original picture tube in it was a 21 ALP4, but if you look back to the former vids on this Philco, it had already been replaced with this 21 CBP4 short neck. But it had every sign that it had been used for some years. I would say minimum about 3 years after presumably a Sears service center had installed this picture tube in it, because the neck of the picture tube was blackened thoroughly all the way around with Corona soot, and as was the rest of the picture tube. This picture tube did not come out of that Olympic this clean, and it had roach egg sacs just stuck absolutely everywhere all over it. But it still had a lot of buildup down on the lower bell, which normal surface dust does not gather down here on the lower portions of a picture tube, y'all. And especially it doesn't gather as ash. So this picture tube had been in use inside this Olympic for some years before this chassis finally met its fate. Looking at it right now on the work table, it actually looks remarkably better than the Philco, doesn't it? Not nearly as rusted as the chassis in the 56 Philco. I gotta say, it cleaned up pretty well, but it was not always in this condition, y'all. There's a fuse holder I went ahead and I mounted. High hopes. Doesn't look that bad at all. I like that it's actually got the vertical linearity and vertical height controls in the front of it. Okay, hey, I actually labeled them. Horizontal hold, vertical hold, brightness. And then down here would have been recessed. Vertical linearity, vertical height. leaving the contrast control right here concentric to the on-off switch and volume control. Yeah, it actually looks good. All the more heartbreaking for what lies ahead. Yeah, old girl cleaned up well. Very well. All I had was a digital phone at the time, so I'll see if I can find any photographs I took of this thing when I originally recovered it. Because, trust me, it was filthy as it could be. But having repaired 2 of these before, I was so sure of myself. Yeah, I just went ahead and I ordered. What was my practice back then was for unit chassis to just go ahead and install all new parts, because these are kind of tricky and tedious to remove again and again, y'all. So I wanted to be as sure of it as I could be. So I invested heavily in this sucker. Not really, a whole lot of money, but I was going the extra mile for a project I was very, very sure of. We'll take a peek at the flyback transformer. Which excelled every test I put it to at the time. One of the things I always test before investing in a project like this. Notice the way they put a catch here for the shield. So, pull the shield out. There we have it. Original honeycomb wound for a 90-degree deflection flyback transformer. Which test resistance wise every bit, within micro inches of spec in every way. I don't believe this is one of the problems with this chassis, but I have gained more suspicion of it since then. But you'll notice that, like I talked about with Philco, it has been recoated. I did go ahead and do that. Y'all, this stuff right here, if you've never tried it, use it. You will not regret it. I had to kind of rebuild the top of the case on it where that had come apart and was just hanging loose for the termination of the winding to the high voltage rectifier. So I used some high voltage putty along with the Corona dope on that, and it had one lead that electrolysis had eaten into down inside a sleeve like this that I had to redo. But other than those 2 things, the flyback was in great shape. The real heartache on this television began when I turned it up and I looked underneath it. Wow. Just look at all of the work I did here. Ooh, boy. Look at all of the shiny new parts I installed in this television. Okay, this one right here was new old stock, but checked good in every way. But look at this. If it only had worked out. But it never did. Oh, by the way, notice all the shadow up in here, y'all. And remember, right now it's sitting on its back. That was never a luxury I had back then. And that is a notorious inconvenience of unit chassis. But everybody that's ever messed with any of these already knows wherefrom I speak. But yeah, new parts. I was gonna have me a fully functional, shiny, new looking, what, did I make some notes here? Yeah, I did. A fully functioning, shiny, new, performing 1956 Olympic. And it was all for naught. It never, ever rewarded any of this effort at all. And I mean at all. The problem is, a while ago I was talking about how intact this television was. And cabinet, pedestal, all of that, you know, yeah, I had all the tubes in it. It was fine, but what I found when I flipped the chassis up on this was a very different story. Filter capacitors were missing. Wires were cut. Circuits that had no business being attached to each other were tied together. It was a total mishmash jumble from what it had originally been. And it had obviously been somebody back ages ago. It was some servicers or hobbyist abandoned project. And they had already, it had a significant amount of parts missing. Really. And just wires hanging loose. And I was undeterred. One problem I encountered with this television was right here. I actually made a note of it. Let me get this wire out of the way. Series R. AC chassis Series R. And I had no supplement for a Series R chassis. The main service data on this chassis does not cover Series R. And from the way everything was configured in it, what remained of what was still configured in it when I got it, I have a feeling, my theory at least, is that at some point in the past, that Series R is what got somebody into trouble. They were working on it, maybe a servicer was working on it, and had to put it aside for a while with parts disconnected. And then if you see the schematic for the SAM schematic for the main manual on this television, which I didn't have the best copy in the world of, my gosh, at all the dotted in circuit alterations in that schematic. I mean, I stared and stared and stared at the schematic for this television until I was cross-eyed and blue in the face. And that's my theory of what actually ended this television's life. That somebody did not get the entire job done all in one shot, put it aside, came back to it, got lost, and never found their way back. And then when I got into it, I never even found my way ultimately to where he or she had gotten lost. This was right then. Probably I should have reconsidered trying on this one, because an entire multitude of components were missing and wires just clipped, and it was giving me every warning that it might not have been worth the investment, but I wanted it so bad. I've never had a chassis that behaved like this one before. I've never had a chassis that just delighted in popping parts within the first few moments of operation the way this one did. And that was the problem that ultimately made me abandon this. Literally, without any rhyme or reason that I could ever figure out at the time, it actually bursted some of these orange drops for some reason. I don't know. Maybe I got a bad batch. Time will tell. But it burst several new capacitors on me. This one right here is rated at 600 volts, and there's no real reason for that other than the 500 volt rated one that I had here for a time. It actually blew the whole end cap out of, and I mean blew it out hard. And then I had resistors that just suddenly, and I mean quick, just like and fast as that, they were up in smoke, almost about to flame up in this television. I am very sure that the wiring is still fouled up in this thing somehow, but hours and hours and, well, months of checking and rechecking and tracing and retracing, I could never see where I screwed anything like that up on this, but it's not impossible, and I'm forced to conclude that that's got to be some of the trouble with it. This is the reason why the Philco didn't get a lot of new parts installed in it. I mean, here we had a 1956 Olympic with a good, strong, excellent picture tube in it, and I gave it the best of everything to zero result. And in the meantime, the Philco, which had a dead, spent, flat picture tube in it, got scrapped together with used parts and gave me years of service. Economics do come into this hobby, y'all. I cannot bear any longer, since I finally ended up putting it aside, having this one chassis just house this many brand new parts that all told, y'all would never believe it, but these capacitors, these shiny new orange drop capacitors, probably all told by now have less than 15 or 20 minutes use on them. I just noticed that I had it sitting on the adjustment for the horizontal oscillator down here, and that's not good. So I actually found a use for the Cornell Dubelier out of the Philco. It makes a really nice kind of prop, put a little distance there. Its life isn't quite over yet. Actually came in kind of useful. My goodness. Very exceedingly rare that I do anything like this, y'all. You hear a lot of talk about rat damage in old equipment like this. And rat beds, yeah, they're a sorrowful sight. They are definitely not a pleasant thing to run across, but given my choice, I would take rat damage to roach damage any day of the week and twice on Sunday. Rat damage, I've gone behind and repaired significant damages caused by rats, but this was my first time seeing a tube type chassis literally just overrun with roaches. Normally roaches tend to leave older equipment like this be. They like circuit boards. They like especially more modern circuit boards that have kind of an oil they secrete. That draws roaches big time. But I've always seen roaches and signs of roaches and more modern equipment, but never ever, and certainly not on this scale, inside of tube type equipment. Rats, if nothing else, at least they're kind of cute. They have fuzzy little expressive faces and kind of look like mongrel guinea pigs. Okay, it's officially nighttime and I'm a few hours in now and making, well, it feels totally backwards to call this progress, so I guess I'm just still moving along. I had forgotten that among the missing parts in this television was the audio output transformer. So one of the few parts I didn't buy new, the replacement, used replacement I put in for that, is now missing from it again. And I had also forgotten just how much hardware this project had entailed. The number of terminal strips in it that were broken to pieces that I had to replace. And I've still got more terminal strips that I installed to go. And I also had forgotten to mention that I actually removed and took the covers off of the power transformer because it was full of egg sacs from roaches. I actually had removed and cleaned out the power transformer, y'all. This is what I'm talking about when I say I prefer rat damage and rat beds to roach damage and roach nest any day of the week. Here's another terminal strip that I'm presently on up here in kind of close quarters up here at the front of the chassis. And there's a burn resistor, one of many I sacrificed to this project. And so I'm currently in the process of removing this terminal strip, and I'll just tack all the wires for each terminal together to keep track of how they were connected as I move forward with this. Looking mighty bare. And I got to thinking, this television was stored. The owners of it stowed it away, and that's how years later I came by it, because they actually stowed it away and kept it. So that's a question on my mind. Did they pick it up from a TV shop, totally just blissfully unaware of how it had been robbed, and not even robbed with any conscience? When you're talking about terminal strips, busted all the yin yang and everything. Did they have any clue, or were they one and the same? Are the people who stole this away, or the individual who stole this thing away, is that who stripped all these parts out of it? Because I'm just progress-wise a little ways into this, and look at how bare it is. And I haven't even gotten down in here really to the main event yet. I'm going slow because I'm trying to preserve the lead length on these new parts that I installed, because I really intended that these were going to be in there permanently, and then I was just going to have this television right on. So a lot of them, like right down here, the leads have been cut to length. I cut them to length, to do a neat installation on them. And so I'm not going to have the full new part lead length on these parts by the time I get them all removed. So I'll be in J-hook country big time when I'm using them. But right here, there was a terminal strip busted, and I put in a vertical one. Right here, going to the fuse on the top of the chassis, I added these two. The rubber grommets were put there by me. It didn't originally have those. And I haven't dug out the SAMs on this, but I'm remembering that one difference between this one and the previous two is the previous two of these that I had done for other people actually had a filter choke, whereas this one had the revision of a resistor. That's not so unusual, but before this is over, I'll give y'all a view of the schematic. There were extensive changes to the horizontal oscillator circuit, the way it linked up to the power supply and all. And I have to wonder why Olympic, after a point, didn't just assign another model number, because there were a lot of really kind of drastic production changes in this series of chassis. And it looks like a whole lot of them came together in this one, which, let's see, where is it? There we are. Series R, which my service data doesn't quite go up to, and I never had any luck locating the supplement for Series R. After a point, I mean, production changes are as common as they can be in televisions in particular, radios too, but this thing really had drastic differences from the schematic and what I determined was probably original factory configuration. So unlike with other brands and all that I've come across with a lot of revisions in them, I think Olympic should have just assigned another chassis series to this rather than continuing, with just posting a suffix in it somewhere, because this one was really pretty drastically different from the original schematic in a lot of places. I don't know how far I'm going to get on this tonight, because trying to preserve the lead length and trying to, as much as I can, preserve as much of the lead dress so that when I revisit this one day, I won't have as much to figure out. That's taking a lot of time in this, so I'm probably going to get into at least another day on this, because it is a cinch I will not get this completed tonight. But just imagine, if you will, talking about rats and rat beds, having to go into this and finding like about a quarter cup full of egg sacs stuck all over the place inside a power transformer. That would have been a real stink bomb if I'd ever gotten this thing fired up long enough to hot this thing up without having gone into it and cleaned it out. Egg sacs like that right there. I mean, the power transformer was just full of them. The covers, the coil capsule, it was, yeah. Pukalicious. Pukalicious. Power transformer was full of these suckers, just stuck everywhere. Why did this thing have to be so roach pooped, roach wrecked, and trashed? Another day, and still at it. Doing the thing that I hate to do and rarely do. And it's looking pretty bare now. I'm down to this last little cluster down here. I'm going to have to take the horizontal oscillator and sine wave coil assembly out to get these capacitors back here. And I never imagined I would be doing that, removing this again, just simply to get the parts back. But I do need these parts for other projects. They're not doing any good in this chassis. I've dug out the manual for this television. The manual I ended up using was Howard W. Sam set 306 folder 11, which doesn't cover the Series R chassis that this particular Olympic has. And I'm reliving some of the way this schematic really just buffaloed me, because if we look at this power supply, it's very super simple, and you'll see we had some models that had an iron core filter choke, and then this is one of those that had the resistor subbing that. So that was one production change, and that's very common. That stuff like that doesn't really throw me at all. But so many just crossed out, and dotted in circuit alterations, production changes that were in this television, in this series of chassis, the AC Olympic chassis. And I was talking about some of them being pretty drastic, and here's a good example of that. You'll see on the schematic, this one has an isolated flyback. And this actual television, this chassis I'm working on, if I'm remembering correctly, has the isolated flyback transformer. But then we come back over here to the power supply, and directly above it we see some versions had an auto transformer. This is what I'm talking about with production changes, and I think there comes a point when really you're better off just to assign another chassis model and have a totally different manual, because y'all, between I'm sure there's geniuses out there that would disagree with me, but between an auto transformer horizontal output stage and an isolated transformer horizontal output stage, these are two pretty radically different circuit topographies. I mean, yes, it all ultimately accomplishes the same thing, but when you overlay a change this radical into a schematic, it's easy for me to see how somebody years, decades ago, if they had to put this thing aside and then come back to it, how they got lost. It just complicates the schematic more than it needs to be. And especially on one like this, when somebody else has already struggled with it and gotten so lost, and then coming behind, as I did on a situation like this, it really just got the feeling very, very daunting to me. And there I was with a television that had a really good, very strong picture tube in it. This one. that I had put all of these new parts into, and then a Philco that I had just scrapped together due to it having a flat picture tube with just used parts, and it was playing fine. And I just couldn't see the sense of having an excellently performing chassis in one television with a flat picture tube and having a perfect 90-degree deflection picture tube and a chassis like this going to waste on a project that just kept fighting me. So I decided, to just go ahead and put this one to one side, and I didn't know if it was going to be permanent or temporary, but go ahead and get some use out of a good picture tube when you've got it. So that's kind of that's the main reason why I put this thing to one side. That's the way I like it. Another little note. Since occasionally these things do happen, I've learned to always try to leave myself a little hook, if you will, when I install parts, like right here, to be able to catch the lead, just in case I do end up having to pull it back out. And makes it a little bit easier just to leave a little loop there, or something you can catch on to, a little hook, so that you can kind of unwrap your installation easier on the regrettable occasion that you ever have to do anything like this. But hopefully this will not be the end on this television. I got a little mess here. I don't want to damage that coil, but and trying to work through the camera, I'm gonna earn a prize on YouTube for uncapping videos. Maybe I should make a channel, just basically for people who need a little solace once in a while because their projects tend not to work out. They can always come to my channel and see me removing neatly installed parts on my projects when they don't work out. How would that be? I might get some views from that, you reckon? Okay, now hopefully with a little heat that'll turn loose and I'll be able to wiggle that right on out. This is actually a lot like that kids game that a lot of Gen Xers grew up on, Operation. We used to have, anybody remember that, where you had to remove bones from the guy on the operating table without making his nose light up and buzz. It's a lot like that, actually. And before who made that game? Was that Milton Bradley? The old Operation game? Anyway, before taking the forceps loose, I'm going to continue doing as I have been. And I'm just going to put a coat of solder on all these terminals to keep a good 10 on them until the day I come back, and that way I'll be able to just quickly unsolder them, and I won't have to bother about cleaning them again and retinning them at that time. They'll already have a fresh tin on them by the time I come back to this project. So steady hand, steady hand. I think this is a sound takeoff coil right here. And I always have to be careful about damaging parts like these. But yeah, if you ever played Operation as a kid, this is the hobby for you. And you see it's taking time to go through all of this for each and every one, so I think it'll pay off in the long run. I really, the more I get all of this emptied out, the more I'm thinking I'm going to finally come back to it and approach it the way I probably should have to begin with when I realized circuits were crossed up in it. I think really this is probably the treatment now that this television originally needed from me back then. So no, it's not the end. We'll come back to it. Come on, pull focus. There you go. There you go. If I can get nothing else out of this thing ever, I will at least get some experience in shooting soldering operations for YouTube. There you are. Nice and loose. Question, did I just unsolder the capacitor or that resistor? Either way, something is ready to give here. Alright, I made another loop there. See, I always try, just in case, because once in a while these things will happen. I try to preserve the parts I use for reuse just in the thankfully relatively rare event that I end up pulling them all out again. Because while there's no shame in J hooks, especially in my own, well, just period. I don't, they're not my preferred look. But yeah, you know, what would be the shame in it? None, because I mean, what was I ever going to do? You know, like every time somebody viewed my nice playing Olympic, was I going to tell them like, well, hold on, wait a minute, let me pull it apart for you so you can see what a neat part installation I did on each and every capacitor. No, I wasn't going to do that. It's just to have it nice and neat and just know for myself I did it that way. Although that said, I've got a Traveler, 17-inch Traveler that had a very bad cabinet when I got it. And I've still got the cabinet, but the television's been displayed for years, just a unit chassis like this without the cabinet, and it draws more attention than the ones that still have the real nice cabinets. People like seeing the skeleton of this stuff. On to the next one. And we are out. Until next time. I am struck looking at it like this. I really had forgotten just how heavily stripped this chassis was when it came to me. I really put a lot more parts into it than the originals that I took out. Wow. And it looks bare. Very bare now. And I'm going to go through all of this and save the originals and group all of these and just leave it like this until I tackle it again. One thing about it, seeing it like this, it actually shows more promise than it did originally. It'll be a lot easier to just go ahead and do a full wire and circuit trace on this now and begin to build it back up again. And like I said, you know, it's not really a rebuild, because if it had its full complement of capacitors and everything when it came to me, by the time you replace all these dried out electrolytics and leaky paper and black beauties and do all this, you've pretty effectively done a rebuild on one anyway, even if you don't strip them bare before you do it, which I don't recommend. Under any other circumstance, I would never strip one this bare and then try to piece it back together, but on this one there was really no choice. I didn't even take everything out. Right here we've got the original filament loop for the high voltage rectifier that I replaced, and I'm going to leave that in place for now. I see no need to remove all of that and disassemble the high voltage section. Planning to come back to it. And I think the way I'm going to tackle it next time will be, since I'm forced into this position, is I'll start just by getting the power supply built up and aspire first and foremost just to have a working audio section. And once I have that, I'll focus on the tuning and the IF and getting a signal from the antenna all the way through to the audio. And then, only after I've got all of that done, will I focus on reworking or rebuilding at this point the horizontal and vertical. Somewhere in this thing there is a solder splash that I did not see, or still circuits crossed that I did not find, and it should be easier to locate all that now that it's stripped down this far. So now I can go ahead and continue with the 56 Philco, and when I get it to the point to get another picture tube in it, I can take this picture tube and reinstall it in this one, and I'll just have it in storage with its picture tube reinstalled until I'm ready to come back to it and tackle it again. Yeah, that's about 1/10. Oh boy. Yeah, this television was full of this stuff, y'all. Wow. That is about 1/10. And yet, I don't know, maybe not entirely beyond hope, depending on the scrap material that I would have. Not frozen. A little rough, but not. Yeah, that still moves. Well, it's still got some cone in it, and I have seen worse. Wow. All right. Boy, this is really taking me back to my childhood, back when I first discovered old tube type equipment and fell in love, and no amount of filth or poor cabinet condition could deter me. But actually, this cabinet is in great shape, and cleaning it up, I'm discovering markings on it that I hadn't seen before. One, let me see if I can pull focus on it. Right here inside the back floor of the inside the chassis floor, we have what looks to be MUNN Mun Better Cabinet. Very rare to find a cabinet manufacturer stamp inside a television, and I think this might be the single only one I've ever seen a marking like that in. It's getting there, y'all. It's getting there. I'm not gonna get it perfect, but it's looking a whole lot better. Yeah, and I'm breathing in enough ancient dust and bacteria to fill my quota on that for probably the next 10 lifetimes, but this is interesting. I'm going to try to preserve that bee, and I definitely want to preserve the cabinet builder stamp. And actually the filth is cleaning off pretty well, but I still think a coat of paint or some staining or something would sure be beneficial on this. But it's actually a very well put together cabinet. I'm going to try to preserve, just for the heck of it, what's left of that internal antenna as well. And down here on the bottom, I knew it had an access panel, but it's not labeled the way I thought it'd be. Important serviceman, see service manual for instructions to convert to UHF. I don't know why you'd be going in there for a UHF conversion. I assumed this was a panel for IF alignment, but the addition of an optional factory UHF tuner shouldn't normally require any IF work, so I was kind of surprised to see this labeled that way. Anyway, yeah, it's cleaning up. It's not ever gonna look new, but cleaning up pretty well. So I'm just gonna keep on going like this, and I'll decide what to mask off and go ahead and do some gluing before I do any painting or anything on it, and I'll mask off this stuff that I want to keep. Looks a whole lot better around the speaker grill. Oh well. Onward and forward. Okay, here I am going to be less drastic. And I'm going to look to see if I find a MUN cabinet label anywhere on this while I'm working on it. It's in pretty rough shape, but I'm thinking Quad-O grade, that's 4O's grade steel wool, and WD-40 as a lubricant on this to start. not really in bad shape. This could be very easily refinished, but yeah, is it worth it? The way this television turns out is going to decide a lot of that for me. But still, I think yeah, WD-40 and Quado grade steel wool work very well on this. But I am surprised that I was talking about it doesn't swivel. And I was with the TV setting on it, and I was thinking about, you know, a traditional Lazy Susan being up underneath it. But look at the way they did this. They just put a wheel in each corner. So if you want to know how to build a cheap Lazy Susan, this would be the way to do it. Just install a wheel in each corner and so I'll probably end up disassembling this to do a more thorough cleaning on it, but so far I don't see any labeling on it, but time will tell. But I think this is the first pedestal I've seen actually built like this, where instead of a central Lazy Susan, it was made like this, so presumably a little lubrication will fix this right up. Okay, onward and upward. I might ought to wait till tomorrow to tackle this. Daylight's getting gone pretty quick, but let's see what happens here. And then of course once I start, I'll keep going all the way through to the end. Get your finger out of the shot, man. All right. Okay, how it ends up looking in better light, I won't know until tomorrow, but it's a pretty good inconspicuous place to begin, and may end up giving the TV cabinet some of this treatment. It's getting dry. How bad am I swirling and scratching everything? Time will tell, but I think at a point there's only one way for something to go, and that's up. Egg sac residue from roaches. Alright, I'll catch y'all on the flip side. Okay, well, I have seen and done worse. All in all, for just a cleanup job, I'm pretty happy with the way this turned out. I tend to wonder whether it had not been necessary, but in as much as it was, I think it just for WD-40 steel wool and some paint cleaned up pretty well. The color of choice was satin burgundy. That was the closest match I could find to what the cabinet kind of already had. But boy, does that drastically improve the smell of the general environment. Had a little overspray, but the heart or the bee, whatever you want it to be, still visible. And actually, it is a bee because I found this one scrawled on the other side toward the front, kind of down below what was left of the tube chart. So definitely somebody put their initial on this cabinet. So yeah, it's still visible there. I did some re-gluing down here at the bottom, and the more I look at it, the more I've decided this must actually have been none better cabinet, N-U-N-N, rather than M-U-N-N. I don't know, I've looked and I can't find any information on any company by either of those names, but maybe it's just the modernist in me, but none better cabinet, N-U-N-N, just sounds a lot more trendy. So I kind of think that's what that is. None better cabinet. None better cabinet company. Has some more scrawling down here on the bottom on the chassis floor. I found the pieces and glued back the missing pieces here of the old internal antenna, and I even went through the trouble of using some more WD-40 and steel wool to clean it up, clean the overspray off of it. I don't really know why, other than it's an original detail of the television that is missing from many televisions from this era. So I went ahead and decided, for the time being, this one's going to remain in here because it's still mounted solid. So I just had to glue back a couple of pieces here. And I don't know, maybe in 50 years time that'll be of interest to somebody whoever excavates this next, and they can criticize my work like I've criticized so much of what I found on this television when it came to me. I think that's actually probably part of the fun of working on a lot of these old TVs and radios, is discovering the past history of them as you go. The old swivel pedestal still wants to hang up rather than rotate, but that's pretty common for TV pedestals from this period. The weight of the television puts kind of a curve in them where they'll begin to scrub over time. But I lubricated the wheels up under it and hit all that with a good lick of paint as well. So it's doing better than it was. Not as good as I'd like to have it, but all good things in time. I never did find any cabinet markings, and who knows, maybe this wasn't the original pedestal too. Maybe this is not an Olympic pedestal, but still pretty good quality. Many televisions that were originally sold with pedestals, sometimes the TV would be one brand and the pedestal would be another, but this matches the old Olympic really well. And while I would rather have the appearance of bare wood as it was originally, bear in mind, this is not supposed to be a full, professional restoration. This is just getting something cleaned up and really kind of sanitized and clean to have in a house is really the point of this whole operation. So I wasn't going to, linger, especially when this is not a working project, and probably at least a year, maybe a couple of years, who knows, away from ever working. This is just about getting it all where it'll be presentable, and where once the picture tube's mounted back in it, I'll be able to display it all, even though it's not working. I don't like displaying non-working products, but this one right here, actually, I think it's going to look pretty good by the time it's all back together. The old control panel cover and this cushion came out particularly nice. I mean, it really it gleams. The camera is not doing this justice, y'all, because it is really just I think I've inhaled too much dust doing this, so I've kind of got a frog in my throat. But anyway, this really shined up very, very well. It ought to look great by the time it's remounted. I really like the old the way they did the Olympic torch right there in the middle under the M. And everything labeled in here: horizontal, vertical, brightness. And then yeah, man, get a muffler. Vertical linearity and the vertical height adjustment ports down in the bottom. A lot of times this old plastic is found rotted and kind of deteriorated, but this one really just shined up. Really, it's like a mirror-like luster on this everywhere. So I'm especially proud of this. That's a very nice detail. Beautiful. Oh, beautiful. Even without a picture tube in it. All in all, that cleaned up pretty well. I do have to say so myself. It had only one way to go. UHF reception guaranteed with insertion of new Olympic rocket tuner strip. I like space age terminology. You can tell we were still shooting for the moon back when this thing was built. Olympic rocket tuner strip. It's too bad I couldn't fix this thing the first go around and just show y'all a working television, but we'll have another day. And this time y'all will get to come along for the ride on it. But anyway, that's gonna just about do it for this video, and it's gonna do it for this Olympic for a while. I just wanted to share this one because not every project I do ends in success. Once in a while there'll be one like this, and here this early in the channel I thought I would go ahead and share this because the Philco and this one, like I said, their fates are kind of intertwined, since the Philco's been playing off the picture tube from this one. But sometimes I get into projects that don't work out, and some, unlike this one, I don't ever try again. And that was my original thinking in sharing this video, that I was just going to get this one all back together, and then it could be a prop for a theater company or something somewhere, and I would just take everything out of it, and you know, it would look good you know, for somebody that just wanted a non-functional display piece for whatever purpose. But the further I went with it, the more I imagined a way to continue with it and try it again. And that's going to take it's going to take time for me to get ready for that, because there's equipment that I didn't use the last time that I think would be of great help in getting this television fixed, finally tracking down what's wrong with it and finally getting it fixed. So there's going to be some videos on some test equipment that I plan to use on this thing coming up. And get on by, dog. There you go. Anyway, one of the advantages of living in town. Anyway, yeah, I'll get some, there'll be videos on equipment that I plan to use in my next attempt on this 56 Olympic. All of those will be coming up, and eventually we will see this one again. And I am now actually looking at it all cleaned up and all like this. My determination to fix it is actually more than rekindled. I'm very fired up to see this thing really showing its stuff and working with its original chassis again. But yeah, I was thinking in the beginning of this that I would just clean it up and then sell it for somebody that wanted a display piece, or an aquarium, a swivel aquarium. But no, we're not going to do that. We're going to fix it. I don't know exactly when. Like I said, it might be next year. It's just going to, things are going to have to come together and take shape before I tackle this one again. But anyway, until then, for anybody that's ever had something they had big dreams on that didn't work out, you know, as well as they had hoped, I wanted to go ahead and put this video out there for y'all. So until next time, take care, and we'll see what we can get into here next time. Y'all keep it real out there. Get a hobby shop. We're out.